Welcome to Dear Watchers, an omniversal comic book podcast where we do a deep dive into the multiverse.
We are traveling with you through the stories and the worlds that make up an omniverse of fictional reality we all love. And your watchers on this journey are me, Guido.
And me, Rob. And Guido, we have an extra special guest conversation. Extra special guest conversation. So special, the music can't even stop.
No, it's true. In fact, wait. This is how special our guest is. There we go. You didn't even say the name yet, and they're getting excited. Who's our guest?
It is Luciano Vecchio.
It is Luciano Vecchio. So we are so excited. We've been waiting for this conversation since New York Comic Con, maybe even before that, but that was our opportunity when we got to meet Luciano. I've been a huge fan of his. He's done such incredible work at Marvel and DC, but in particular, those Pride anthologies, co-creating the character of Somnus, just really incredible stuff. And we recorded this right around the time that his creator-owned work is out, which you're going to hear a lot about, Sereno from CEX Publishing. So people should support that and just make sure you're following Luciano and supporting his work, because he's great. And I think there's just so much more to come from him as an artist and a writer.
Yeah, and you got a commission from him when we saw him at New York Comic Con.
I did, and I was so excited.
I know. And if other people want a commission from Luciano, he is going to be at a whole bunch of U.S. cons in March.
And he shares that
at the end of the episode.
Yes, and our commission, of course, was of Promethea, because he does incredible work with strong female characters, with strong queer characters, and it made so much sense. And we discovered a lot more connections to his love of things like Promethea on this episode. That really was a surprise in the conversation that I was happy to discover. But what was something that you are still thinking about from our conversation with Luciano?
I am still thinking about how much he thrives on barriers, on structure in that way. And I'm always interested, as an artist, do you thrive on just getting to run wild and doing whatever you want, or do you actually thrive on having some constraints? So I loved kind of hearing him talk about whether it's the medium, whether it is being a collaborator, whether it's working with a pre-existing character, how those constraints actually fuel his creativity. And in an era where sometimes you can put on a TV show and it's like 2 hours long for a single episode, it's like, I kind of like the idea of what is the power that can come from having some actual restrictions put on your work as an artist.
Well, and he had such a interesting and unique relationship to limits, because even the medium, since he wrote for the Infinity comic medium at Marvel, even the medium itself was a restriction at some point in his work. So it was cool to hear the way he related to all of those limits. And I keep thinking about a few things, so I'm going to choose two. I'm going to cheat our system here. One is because I really appreciated hearing about his relationship to magic and spirituality, and then the way that related to his getting older and his greater understanding of the world, because I identify a lot with that. And people who've listened, especially to our spin-off podcast, Omniversity, have learned that about me and my relationship to Promethea. And I've been thinking about also aging when we were talking about and listening to the official podcast of The Last of Us and the middle-aged gay men that they depicted. I've been thinking about aging and just what aging does to your relationship to yourself. And so that was really interesting to explore a bit with Luciano. But the thing that I think also most resonated, that I can't stop thinking about, is his answer, and I actually kind of don't want to spoil it, about why multiversal storytelling might be really popular. We've had a lot of great answers to that question in discussions we've had with creators, and we've thought a lot about this. It's come up a lot on our show, but this discussion about why multiversal storytelling might be so present in culture right now, I had not thought about, and it makes so much sense. So I can't wait for people to hear that part of our discussion, because wow, I think that's correct. I think it's correct, and I want to know what our listeners think. So I'm not spoiling it. Listen in and tell us what you think, if that makes sense to you.
So without further ado, let's just jump right in. What a great build-up. And with that, dear watchers, welcome to episode 86, and let's check out what's happening in the omniverse with today's conversation. We have an extra special guest that we are very excited to talk to.
Yes,
the artist,
we are.
Yes, the writer, artist, and creator, Luciano Vecchio. Hello, Luciano.
Hello. Hi. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I know it's later for you where you are, so thank you so much for joining us. We are super excited to jump into this conversation. But first, Guido is going to tell us a little bit more about you.
All right.
Yes, Luciano, we're huge fans of yours. Huge fans. And
thank you.
for our listeners who don't know, Luciano has been a comic artist and writer for Marvel, DC, and his creator-owned work. Known at DC, I'd say, for the Pride anthologies and also Young Justice, the amazing series Multiversity Teen Justice last year, and a few other things. And at Marvel, of course, great covers for some of the major events recently, but also Ironheart and work on Wiccan and Hulkling in the Pride issue, designer and co-creator of Somnus, and writer and artist of the Iceman Infinity comics. And also as a writer, you created Sereno. And Sereno, you've been working on, I think, for a number of years, and I'm excited to learn more about that, but is finally seeing print in English from CEX Comics. And right when this episode releases, the issue is either just on newsstands or about to be on newsstands. And there's going to be a forthcoming hardcover edition of it from Zoop, which I'm really excited about. And your independent work has also included the deck of queer heroes that we got at New York Comic Con from you, from Marvel and DC, some of your favorite heroes. And we had the absolute honor of getting a commission from you of Promethea at New York Comic Con. So we're big fans. And and yeah, I hope I captured much of your work. There's so much more, but
yes, that's pretty much the most of it.
Great.
So yeah, we just kind of wanted to start, Luciano. If you could, so much of us are fans before we, go into the art or what we're involved in. So can you tell us a little bit about your early fandom of stories, of comics, and really any kind of other media?
Yes. Well, I have an older brother. So when I was little, I already had access to his collection of comics. It was mostly DC Comics, pre-Crisis, early 80s, that era. That was my first dive into fandom and what formed my imagination very, very early on. I mean, when I was starting to learn how to read. So it was mostly DC Comics for me because it had the most Spanish translations when I was little. I live in Argentina. So it was mostly that, and on TV, also Super Friends, and I don't know, Thundercats, Ninja Turtles, all that kind of stuff. As I grew a little older, it will be Vertigo stuff, Sandman, Doom Patrol, and that combined with my interest for mythology, mysticism, religions, all kind of religions, spirituality, which for me, when I was a teenager, it was kind of something in between superheroics and reality. Like the closest thing we could get to having powers was imagining them through spirituality, I guess. So that was part of the fandom too, I guess. It connects a lot. And I will say, like, George Perez Wonder Woman and New Teen Titans was like the most poignant comic works through my early years. I don't know. There's much more all the time. I don't know. Batman animated was a bit strong, and a lot of anime also, like Knights of Zodiac and Sailor Moon. So that mix of growing in Latin America, you see everything from afar. You get like the media from the United States and from Japan, and you make your own mix of all that different influences. So I guess that's kind of shapes my early worldview.
Yeah, I can see your art being a good mix of anime plus like Jose Luis Garcia Lopez and the 80s, the Bronze Age DC. He's Argentinian too, no?
I think he was born, but he's based in the US. Okay. I think he didn't grow up here.
Well, yeah. Even you had done the amazing commission of Promethea for us at New York Comic Con, a myth, and I know, Guido, you were really into myths growing up, and still are. I was really into myths. It definitely, I think, if you were a comic fan or fan of these other worlds, it was like the sanctioned way through school that you could be into superheroes was by learning about all these myths, or as you said, spirituality as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Luciano, how did you go from being a fan to then being a creator, being an artist? What's that journey?
I don't know. I mean, it was always part of my playground. Like when I was a little kid, I would draw, and then when I started to reading and writing, I will start making my own improvised comics. I think everyone does that at some point. Like, I don't know. I remember as a teenager doing the exercise of actually writing a script and then drawing it. I was lucky enough to start my professional path really early. As soon as I finished high school, I got my first assignments and collaborations with indie publishers and stuff. So it was very organic, and it was always there. For me, it went from a thing of playing and to a profession very smoothly. So it still feels like playing most of the time. I think it's great.
Yeah, that's lucky.
Yes. And how do you approach your art to build different worlds? Because you're doing all these you're working with both the big houses, you're really a big world builder. So how do you approach that through your art?
I think that depends a lot on each assignment. I am a huge nerd archivist. So I like when I'm given a certain character to work with, I like doing my homework and researching everything that came before, and trying to get the big picture of what the character is about. Again, as a myth, I'm also Grant Morrison is a big influence on my way of thinking about superheroes. So that exercise of interpreting a character as a modern myth and trying to see what their arc is about and what their iconography is about. And then I try to absorb all that and express my version, my twist, my personal take on what I think that character, that concept is. And when I do my own work, it's much more free, I guess. It's more like dreaming consciously. I guess. Like imagining and putting ideas on paper and try to see what how it makes sense.
Is do you have, maybe it's hard to choose, but do you have a preference working with a pre-existing character where you have these limitations but also that structure to work with, or having your own original character where you can do whatever you want but there's almost maybe too many choices sometimes?
Right. uh, I like both, but I actually find more like potential in the first option. Like having a, I like having an assignment and something to work with. Uh, I find myself being more creative around reworking something that already exists. I mean, it's. I'm also creative with my own stuff, but I don't know. I don't always feel the need to do personal stuff. Like if I don't have something really personal and intimate that I want to express through my work, I would rather work on existing characters and collaborative projects.
That's so cool. And you also are a writer, which not too many people in the industry are writers, artists. So were you always writing and doing art, or did the writing follow the art, or how did you start writing stories?
It was always there, but not as much. I see myself as an artist first, and the writer aspect was always there in, I don't know, smaller scale. But I think I'm also a very involved collaborator when I get a chance. When I am working with a writer who I have a great chemistry with, I tend to participate in plotting or expressing my opinion, and or I don't know. I don't know, providing something from my own perspective through the art that affects the writing. And so, yeah, I learn a lot from the writers I work with. And when I get a chance, the rare chance to write my own, I make use of all that. But yeah, it's there. No, I also want to say I focused more on my creator-owned work a few years ago, like working on my free time to create something else, something personal, which is Sereno, and it made me like redefine myself as an artist, as an author, and the way I see myself as part of this industry or field. But it wasn't my plan to write for Marvel, for example. But it happened. I took a chance with the first Marvel Voices anthology. I pitched a story and they liked it. And then they asked me a few more. And even if it's not anything super large or important, I know, I feel very... they are very special stories. I don't write much, but when I write, I intend it to be super special, at least for me.
Well, the Iceman Infinity comics are awesome. I just hope that they see print one day. So
me too.
Did writing for that? Did you know it was going to be an Infinity comic when you were writing it?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
That way from the start.
Does writing for that medium make it different?
Yes, because in a way, I took a risk and a little different approach than most other writers do with this format. and I didn't want to do like one story and split it on many episodes. Instead, I wanted to compress a lot of story in a very little space, so each episode works as a self-contained story. So yeah, I knew the space was limited, and I knew that we never know how, when it will be the next chance we get to see an Iceman story. So I wanted to give my all and not, like, I didn't want to say the good stuff for an imaginary later that might never come. So yeah, I worked with that limitation and thinking of it as a prompt. The limitation can make you be creative to work your way around. So yeah,
that feels like a common trend in your professional work, is embracing those limitations, whether it's working with a pre-existing character where there's some places that you can't go, or being a collaborator where you're responsible for one part of the work but maybe not the other, or in this case the Infinity comic structure. Sounds like you really embrace those limitations and they actually strengthen your creativity.
Thank you. Yes, I guess. I guess I have to. For example, right now I'm working my way through speaking my second language. It's not my first, and making my career living from very far away, and it's all kind of little aspects of the freelance work, being a non-native English speaker, and not living in the place you're working for. We have a lot of limitations to work around, and I found a lot of potential in it, in that exercise.
And you mentioned Sereno, who, as Guido said, is about to come out, or is out now. Super exciting. This is a project you've been working on a really long time. And can you just tell us a little bit more about, how did this original character and world come about? How did you go about creating this?
Yes. I started it as a webcomic first, as a weekly, one-page weekly webcomic. And it was part of a collective here in Argentina. The collective was called Totem Comics, and it was like different local authors doing their own superhero comic with a very personal stamp. So with that in mind, I went to Grant Morrison's Supergods as a grimoire of sorts, to think what my god archetype superhero will be and how to invoke it. So that was sort of the mindset I was starting from. So I was working with very basic themes like light and shadows, mostly. And vision, which is associated, of course. So the main character, Sereno, is like a magic boy type superhero with powers of light and spirituality. And light can poetically mean a lot of things, and shadows and the dynamics at work there. And also the theme is perspective and vision. So there is like a specific power set, the magic stuff he does with light and shadows, but the point of view changes from episode to episode. So what light means is not crystallizing one idea that is right or wrong. It's a little dynamic. So there's that, and I also wanted a queer character, of course, which now abounds more. But when I started this webcomic in 2014, there weren't many of, and much less as a lead character. So yeah, that's what I needed to do the most. And what else? Yeah, that was. I think that answers.
Are the 3 print issues coming out from CEX? Are those all the webcomics put together, or are you adding new material to build it out?
To this edition, no, this is the original webcomic collected. I did a bunch of new covers for each issue.
Yeah, I love the Superman homage cover for issue 1.
Thank you. Yeah, it's part of coming full circle, invoking the first archetype and mine.
Yeah, and I also love the world because the way the world around Sereno is also so interesting. You have all these characters and this notion, this idea of being your best self, and the characters in this world can be different selves. It seems. So could there be more Sereno in the future? Because I want to see everything about this world.
I think they're cool. Well, that depends on how this goes, this experience. For me, this English edition is also reconnecting with the work, which I finished a while ago and released at some point. Mostly because I was focusing on doing Ironheart and more mainstream work, and I just couldn't keep doing the webcomic also. But I thought it was okay. I was focusing on something else creatively. So if I went back to writing it now, it will be from a different perspective. Like my vision on spirituality has changed with time, and so I'm not sure what I'm curious about what the outcome will be if I resume this series, or maybe I could just expand the universe to other characters. I don't know. That's also a possibility.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of potential there. So fingers crossed.
All right.
And so thinking about Sereno, but also your Iceman stories, and also the stuff you wrote as a teenager, and also your art, what is something you hope people get out of any of your work? What do you want people to get out of it?
Recently, I remember when I was watching the Sandman TV show last year. I remember the feeling I got when I was a teenager reading Sandman in comics, and I remember being moved by the story and feeling this is what I want to do with my work. I want to move people, and I guess that's the best feedback I get when people tell me I cried with this scene, or this was really touching or inspiring or whatever. That's what I find most rewarding, or where I feel most connected with the audience.
That's amazing. And would you say Grant Morrison is one of your favorite influences?
Yes, absolutely. And
what is your favorite Grant Morrison work?
I will say Invisibles and Justice League.
Yeah, Invisibles, I agree.
Also because
I love the Invisibles.
It affected me when the time was right, when I was like turning a page and questioning everything, and that was a great input to get at the time.
Yeah, I think
go ahead.
I just want to say the Invisibles, to me, the Invisibles and Promethea are perfect companions because they
Yes.
both are dealing with spirituality and magic and the end of the world. And I love all of those themes.
Yeah, they have a lot of common. I mean, also recently I was talking to a friend describing the three writers, Neil Gaiman, Alan Moore, and Grant Morrison, like a sort of triple god of comics instead of like a parallel of the triple goddess. Like if comics are or grimoire and or gateway to magic, those three are like our teachers, I guess.
Yes.
But of those three, I find the most connection with Morrison's work because it's full of joy, unlike that of Moore. It's I feel like Moore's work is very inspiring, but also very somber at times. And but yeah, we learn from all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think the idea of tapping into that spirituality that you mentioned, and the idea that you said you wanted to have people moved or move people with your art, to me, I feel like that is probably less common in comics, where I feel like the word, to entertain, to excite, to those kind of feelings I see. But it's interesting. I feel like the being moved, I think I see more of it in comics now, but I think it's still something that you don't see too much, at least in more mainstream superhero comics, is that idea of moving your audience in that way.
And the emotions, yeah.
And the emotion, tapping into that emotion, yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's all part of the. I mean, if I could zoom out of my previous answer and say I am interested into exploring different narratives that what's been the canon and the only thing the mainstream gave us for ages, which was much more patriarchal narratives and based on strength and toughness. So making superhero stories that focus on sensitivity and that's what I learned from Wonder Woman. Like compassion first, and I like expanding on that teaching, that spreading that kind of word and that kind of approach into telling stories. And if you asked me this question a few years ago, I will have had a more pretentious answer, maybe. Like wanting to actually make a big change in the world and an impact through stories, because I think stories affect how our imagination and how we see the world and how the world exists because of that. But yeah, I'm a little more confused now than I was before, which is weird, but it's human.
Yeah, exactly. And I think as we get older, which is why like the Invisibles or Promethea resonate so much, because they're about contradiction and complication. And as we get older, we start to understand all of that much better.
Yes, absolutely. And through experience, I mean, that was my ideal when I had done less work, and it was all a projection of the future. Now I come from the future, and I can say to my younger self, it gets complicated. And you fuck
and
up
with
and
then emotional impact, I feel like, you and I will be watching almost any TV show now, and we might start crying at the end of it. Like, you're just tapped into that emotion so much more as you get older. When it's younger, it's just like, entertain me, or as you said, Luciano, it's also like, oh, I want this to be groundbreaking. But as you get older, it's more like, I just want to get a simple story that's going to affect me somehow, resonate with me.
Yeah.
And so the other thing I think that is groundbreaking in your work is how you tell really important stories of queer characters, Latinx characters. And a few years ago, I don't think you're still doing it, but you were involved with Secuencia Disidente.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that and that project to uplift queer Latin stories?
Yes, I can tell you the story of what it was like. I mean, there was a point around 2016, 17. I was growing in visibility here in Argentina locally as an author, and I was like, I guess the first that was visible because of working for Marvel and DC and stuff, and being out as a gay person and talking about queer subjects and feminism and in regards of the field of comics. So it put me in the spotlight for a bit. And I used to have the wrong notion that I was like the only one, the only queer comic creator around. And what started happening because of many things that were happening at the time, culturally, socially, and collectively, we started to find each other, the queer creators. Yeah, so what happened was at some point someone hosted the first LGBTQ event of comics, and there was an anthology and stuff was happening. So what I made was an open call for other creators to get together in a Facebook group at the time, and realized there was a volume of work, of previous work in webcomics, fanzines, and indie comics stuff that not everyone was aware of, and we had this collective illusion that it was scarce, but we realized that it wasn't, that it was actually a lot of work. So Secuencia Disidente was a way of reuniting all that previous work from the, I guess, early 2000s to that date, and have it all in one place. And it was more like a statement, like we are a lot, this is a lot of work. We are here to tell our own stories and reclaim our subjects for ourselves and share it with everyone. And it had the aspiration of being a platform for new creators and new stuff. But what happened is that there was like such a big expansion of new creators, new queer material appearing in webcomics scenes everywhere, that the platform wasn't needed really. It was just like a turning point in time. It was it had its effect, like a statement. Then now I see it more like an archive, like to not lose our history. But after that, a universe created by itself, so it wasn't really needed anymore.
That's a good problem to have, though, is that
yes.
there's just so much out there in the world, which is amazing. And I think you were saying a Facebook group, and for all the bad things that social media has done, which there's many, I think that, I've certainly seen just in my community, in comics community and in horror community as a big horror fan, and you just realize, wow, I thought I was the only queer person that was into this, and there's all these other people. So it is amazing that these platforms can be used for this good thing of bringing us together in that way.
Yeah.
And this our podcast definitely focuses a lot on multiversal storytelling, alternate universes, things like that. Are you a fan of multiversal stories like What If or Elseworlds?
Yes, and before that, parallel Earths. As I told you at first, I grew up with pre-crisis comics, so Earth 2, Earth 3, all that what ifs that were canon and part of a shared universe. Yes, yeah, I am a fan.
And there seems like we're always surprised by how much multiversal storytelling is happening right now. It seems like it's a very popular way to tell stories. Why do you think that is? Why do you think we're seeing so many multiversal stories right now?
I think it's a sort of spirit of the times, like a zeitgeist. And I guess it might have to do with what we were talking before about social platforms and the way we are now always multitasking and right now talking through a technological portal where we see your faces from different corners of the world. So I think we are living variants and parallel versions of ourselves. I travel a lot to the US, at least once a year for Comic-Con or whatever. And every time I go back and forth, I feel like I'm resuming a parallel life. Because I'm the same person, but a different aspect, depending on the context and how it influences me. Yeah, so I guess the culture is mirroring something that is happened to everyone at a personal level. And also there is this accumulation of culture that we never had before. So we are watching everything all the time at the same time. And it coexists, it influences each other. Even audience influences collective work and the other way around. So yeah, I guess multiverses reflect on that and make us. It's one of the things we are collectively thinking about, I guess.
I love that connection to identity, because I never thought about the way on an individual level, especially people with marginalized identity, but anyone with multiple identities, you are switching in and out of different identities. And I never thought of that as variance and as parallel universe. And that's a incredible connection. I could see why that's happening, because what social media has done has also allowed people to express different identities, to connect based on those identities. And so we have really brought forward different facets of ourselves.
Oh, yes.
And I love that idea.
And they are very fully fledged. Like, I don't know, some people that are now leaving Twitter because of what Twitter has become are actually experiencing the loss of a construct of their self. And it happens with every different social platform where we express an aspect of ourselves in a very specific way. I don't know. It's I'm a little exhausted of all this also. I want to remerge into one being.
Well, I think the human condition has always been to try to integrate every part of yourself. And I think that's become much harder in the world because the world has become so segmented.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, through your stories and through the power of stories, I think many of us start to feel a little more integrated. I really do think that is what makes stories so powerful.
Well, that's a lot.
So before we wrap up and give you back the rest of your weekend, since we are an alternate universe podcast, we ask our guests if they have like a what if that they would love to see or an amalgam that they would love to see. Is there anything you would love to see out there that you dream about?
I guess amalgams are a very, very fun exercise. I did a bunch during quarantine in 2020. I don't know if you saw those. I did
of course.
A bunch of I like also structure to the exercise and the play and the game. So that bunch of amalgams were I chose only to mix MCU and Snyderverse characters, like not the full. And that limitation again gave some very specific combinations that only make sense with that prime materials. What did I have? Like a Superman and Thor mashup, and Wonder Woman and Captain America, and Batman and Iron Man. That's up. It's super fun. I mean, that's a kind of it takes you back to the way a way of thinking that is very connects with your childhood, I guess. Like anything can happen. It doesn't have to make sense. It has to be fun. I love that.
I love that.
Yeah, we love that too. So I hope you do more. I hope you keep doing it.
All right.
And thank you so much, Luciano, for being here today. This was a great conversation. Thank you again so much. And
thank you for your work.
Exactly. Thank you. Yeah. And before we wrap up, can you just tell people where they can find more about you, where they can find your work?
Yeah, mostly Luciano Vecchio art on Instagram, and Luciano Vecchio on Twitter is where I am the most. I post the same stuff everywhere. And I'm doing a bunch of conventions during March. I'm going to Emerald City Comic Con, WonderCon, and Chicago C2E2. So there's that.
Awesome.
I'll be in person in places soon.
And then you can, and then you'll go back to Argentina and merge with your other self again.
Yes.
Well, thank you for your time. I hope that you find your way back to New York Comic Con one day, or that we find ourselves at another con with you, and we can think of a new amalgam to ask you to do.
All right. I like a good challenge.
And that is a wrap on our incredible conversation with Luciano Vecchio. Dear Watchers, thank you for listening. I have been Guido.
And I have been Rob.
And you can follow Luciano's work and links to his profiles in the show notes. You can follow us on all social media at Dear Watchers.
And please leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll be back soon with another trip through the multiverse.
In the meantime, in the words of Uachu, keep pondering the possibilities.